The smile I offered him was a masterclass in deception, a flawless porcelain mask glued to the trembling reality beneath. My inner world wasn't just different, it was a roiling sea crashing against the fragile dam of expectation. Yes, I breathed, the word tasting like ashes on my tongue. The radiant ivory silk of the wedding gown felt like a shroud, its intricate lace a cage woven from obligation. My father's arm, solid and familiar, anchored me as we processed down the seemingly endless aisle. Each step echoed the hollow beat of my heart. The grand hall erupted in applause, a thunderous wave of approval. They beamed, mistaking this meticulously orchestrated pageant for a celebration of love. They saw a radiant bride embracing her destiny. What they witnessed was a young woman desperately performing acceptance, clinging to the only script society had handed her, and the bitterest pill. A part of me craved to believe in this elaborate theater, because delusion, however suffocating, was infinitely less terrifying than acknowledging the truth screaming within my bones. His name was Marcus, a name that carried the weight of respectability. He was by every conceivable measure a good man, impeccable lineage tracing back generations in our insular town, a stable, prestigious career as a corporate lawyer, financially secure, kind enough in a distant, undemanding way. Marrying Marcus wasn't a choice born of passion. It was the only viable path, the sole trajectory that wouldn't shatter my mother's fragile standing or invite the corrosive whispers of our deeply conservative community. At 25, I was already an anomaly. My peers were either flashing engagement rings heavy with promise or cradling newborns, their lives unfolding along the prescribed lines. I, however, carried a profound foreignness within me, a dissonance I feared to name, let alone voice. Its whispers began in childhood, while my girlfriends sighed over storybook princes and blushed at the boys in class. My gaze, unbidden and unsettling, lingered on the curve of a teacher's smile, the strength in a female athlete's stride, the quiet intensity of a librarian's eyes. Back then, the feelings were abstract, easily dismissed as childish admiration, harmless until they weren't, until she appeared in my third year of university, shattering the fragile illusion. But Marcus came first. Our meeting was devoid of sparks orchestrated by well-meaning mutual friends. No lightning bolt, no stolen breath. Just a polite conversation over lukewarm coffee. We got along, they said, which translated to, I was quiet, withdrawn into my protective shell, and Marcus, blessedly, didn't probe. He didn't demand performances I couldn't sustain. Our interactions were peaceful, tranquil, a flat, still pond, and everyone approved. My mother, her eyes sharp with a lifetime of navigating social minefields, had grasped my hand tightly after our third chaperone date. At least, she'd murmured, a complex mix of relief and resignation in her voice. He's someone who understands. You understand. The word was a cruel joke. If Marcus possessed even an inkling of the tempest within me, he wouldn't have merely accepted my frozen stillness that first night in our shared bedroom, my body rigid as stone beneath his tentative touch. He would have recoiled, life after. The vows solidified with alarming speed. Husband, house, job, a sterile diorama of domesticity. Mornings were a blur of mechanically preparing breakfast, eggs cooked precisely how Marcus liked them, coffee strong and black. Evenings bled into silent rituals, dinner consumed in the blue glow of the television. The only sounds the clink of cutlery and canned laughter from sitcoms we weren't watching. Intimacy, when it occurred, was a perfunctory chore, a monotonous ritual devoid of connection. My body complied, a vessel going through the motions, while my mind retreated to some distant, unreachable shore. Sometimes catching Marcus's gaze across the dinner table or in the dim light before sleep, I'd glimpse a flicker of something in his eyes, not accusation, but a profound emptiness. A reflection, perhaps, of his own unspoken resignation. As if he too sensed a crucial piece missing, a hollowness echoing his own, yet was equally paralyzed by the fear of naming it. We became masters of the mundane performance, actors playing Marcus and Sienna with increasing proficiency, yet the act itself leached the color from our days, rendering us quieter stranger, more profoundly alone within the shared space of our meticulously normal life. The consultancy assignment felt like a crack in the suffocating shell. 3 months at a training center outside the city's familiar, judgmental orbit. New faces, a different rhythm, an office buzzing with focused energy instead of domestic stagnation. And then Clara, I heard her name before I saw her spoken, with respect in a project briefing. Clara Vance, the project coordinator. When she entered the conference room, command wasn't asserted. It simply radiated from her. She sat with an easy confidence, leaning forward slightly as she spoke, her eyes holding each person's gaze with a startling directness. Her words were chosen with care, precise and thoughtful. It wasn't just competence. It was a magnetic presence. Strangely, unnervingly, I found I couldn't look away. Her intelligence was a tangible force, her calm assurance a balm and a provocation. The next morning, seeking solace in the ritual of coffee in the cramped office kitchen, she appeared beside me. Her smile was quick, genuine, crinkling the corners of her deep-set eyes. "You must be the new consultant," she stated, her voice warm but laced with playful challenge. "Sienna," I managed, my own voice sounding thin. "Clara Vance, I suspect," she continued, pouring her own coffee. "I'm going to make you work exceptionally." Hard when those training reports land on my desk. There was a spark in her gaze, an invitation to engage. Driving home that evening, the familiar streets blurred. Marcus was away on a business trip. The silence of the house was oppressive. I stood before the hallway mirror, really looked. The face reflected was the same, the carefully arranged features, the eyes that held too much. But beneath the surface, something seismic had shifted. An internal landscape, dormant for decades, had shuddered awake. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Clara and I began orbiting each other, drawn by an invisible current. Initial contact was professional. Clipped emails, brief discussions about project timelines. Then tentative exchanges during coffee breaks, finding ourselves lingering near the machine. Then walks during lunch hours, escaping the fluorescent confines for the dappled sunlight of a nearby park. We talked first about work, then about inconsequential things, then gradually about books, art, the absurdities of office politics. Her laugh was low and rich. When she concentrated, she had a habit of biting her lower lip, a small, unconscious gesture that sent an inexplicable jolt through me. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a depth of understanding that felt dangerously intimate. I wasn't just watching her. I was feeling. Every suppressed tremor, every buried yearning I had spent a lifetime encasing in concrete began to vibrate. A dormant fault line deep within my soul was starting to rupture. One evening, our after-work walk stretched longer than intended. Twilight deepened into velvet night. We found ourselves on a quiet tree-lined street corner, distant city sounds a muted hum. We'd been sharing fragmented stories of our childhoods, hers marked by a bohemian freedom I envied, mine by rigid expectations. A comfortable silence descended, but the air between us crackled. She turned to me. I turned to her. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. The world contracted to the space between our bodies, charged with an electric potential. Clara took a half step. Closer, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears, drowning out reason. Her proximity was overwhelming, a gravitational pull I had no defense against. Panic, sharp and cold, sliced through the haze. "I'm married," I blurted, the words a desperate shield, flung up to protect us both from the precipice we stood upon. Clara stopped. A small, sad smile touched her lips, but her eyes held a fierce, unwavering honesty. "Sienna," she said softly, her voice cutting through my fear, "all I see when I look at you is you, not a wife, not a role. Just the person standing here, the real one." Her words didn't offer escape. They offered recognition. A terrifying, beautiful mirror held up to my hidden self. Retreat became my only strategy. I fled the office the moment the clock struck 5. I let her text sit unanswered for hours, crafting bland, professional replies when I finally did. I even contemplated pleading workload to our manager, begging to be reassigned from projects involving her. But every act of suppression, every enforced distance, only fueled the fire within. Denial became oxygen to the flame. Thoughts of Clara weren't butterflies. They were hurricanes tearing through the carefully constructed facade of my life. My marriage to Marcus felt increasingly like inhabiting a beautifully furnished tomb. The silence during dinners grew heavier, the space in our bed a vast, cold expanse. Sometimes, over the rim of his evening paper, his gaze would settle on me, probing. "Is everything all right, Sienna?" He'd ask, his voice tinged with a concern I couldn't bear. I'd muster the ghost of a smile, a practiced lift of the lips. "Just tired," I'd murmur, the light ash in my mouth. I was fooling him, yes, but I was also fooling the part of me that desperately wanted this numbness to be enough. My inner voice screamed the truth. No, nothing is all right. The worst agony was my inability to speak that no to myself. The breaking point came unexpectedly. One night, after weeks of untouched distance in our shared bed, Marcus rolled towards me. His hand touched my arm, tentative, seeking. An overture after a long silence. I froze, utterly. My body locked, muscles rigid. It wasn't rejection born of anger. It was a primal, visceral disconnect. My flesh didn't belong to him. My spirit never had. Yet I had bartered years for this hollow validation, societal approval. My family's brittle pride, the suffocating comfort of playing the right kind of woman. The costume was strangling me. I could no longer contain the person straining. To break free, I was overflowing, drowning in the pretense. Later that week, propelled by a desperate need for honesty I couldn't find elsewhere, I sought Clara out during lunch. We sat in a secluded corner of a nearby cafe, the air thick with unspoken words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of other patrons faded into white noise. "I know what I feel, Clara," I finally whispered, the admission scraping my throat raw, "but I have no idea what to do." My hands trembled around my untouched coffee cup. Clara didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She simply looked at me, her gaze steady, deep, and impossibly calm. "Sienna," she asked, her voice gentle yet piercing, "when was the last time you were truly, completely honest with yourself?" The question struck like a physical blow. My throat clenched shut. A dam burst behind my eyes, hot tears spilling over, tracing paths down my cheeks. I had no answer. None. My entire life felt like a monument to self-deception. That simple question laid bare the terrifying void where my authentic self should have resided. Later that afternoon, Clara invited me to her apartment. Not with pressure, but with quiet understanding. Her space was different, warm, eclectic, filled with books and art and the faint scent of sandalwood. She made tea, chamomile, calming, and put on an old jazz record, the music a low, soulful thrum in the background. We didn't speak much. We didn't touch. We sat in a silence that wasn't empty, but thick with unspoken understanding. Yet, inside me, a cacophony raged. A scream of liberation tangled with terror. Nothing physical happened that night, but something monumental shifted within my soul. For the first time, under the soft lamplight in Clara's sanctuary, I stopped fighting the truth. I acknowledged the depth of my feeling for this woman. It wasn't just attraction, it was a resonance, a sense of profound recognition that vibrated in my very core. This feeling, terrifying and new, felt more real, more alive than anything I had ever experienced in my entire constructed life with Marcus. Returning home felt like stepping from color back into grayscale. Marcus was home early. He'd set the table with unusual care, cloth napkins, candles flickering. The domestic scene felt jarringly incongruous with the seismic shift inside me. Before we began eating, he placed his hands flat on the table and really looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Sienna," he began, his voice low and strained, "do you have a life apart from me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. I gasped, the sound loud in the quiet room. The urge to lie, to retreat into the familiar script, was overwhelming. But the taste of truth, however bitter, was still fresh on my tongue. "No," I whispered, the word a partial truth wrapped in evasion. I'm just tired, really tired." He held my gaze for a long, excruciating moment. His eyes, usually guarded, held a profound weariness, a dawning comprehension that cut deeper than anger. Finally, he lowered his head, staring at his untouched plate. "Me too," he murmured, the words heavy with a sadness that seemed to fill the room. "I'm very tired too." Lying beside him that night, the chasm between us felt oceanic. The familiar contours of his body were alien territory. I stared into the darkness, the echo of Clara's question reverberating. "When was the last time you were honest with yourself?" The false walls I'd spent a lifetime building, walls of duty, expectation, fear, suddenly felt like a prison I could no longer inhabit. There was someone who ignited my soul, and her name was Clara, not Marcus. The realization was terrifying, but it was also the first clear truth I'd grasped in years. Waking up became an act of courage. The blaring alarm, the splash of water on my face, the bitter tang of coffee, these were now preludes to the day's central question: do I dare to be real today? Marcus had become a ghost in our own home, moving through rooms with a quiet, wounded reserve. I could feel his awareness, his unspoken knowledge of my secret. He knew. The weight of it hung between us, a tangible thing. I simply lacked the strength, the brutal courage, to voice the words that would shatter the fragile remains of our shared illusion. With Clara, the dynamic was different. Simpler in its honesty, yet infinitely deeper. She never pressured, never demanded declarations or timelines. Her presence was a constant, quiet affirmation. "I'm here," she would say simply during a shared coffee break or a brief phone call. 3 words that held an ocean of patience and unwavering support. Her understanding was a lifeline thrown across the chasm of my fear. One afternoon, finding ourselves momentarily alone in a quiet corner of the office after hours, she sat down beside me at the small meeting table. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room. She didn't speak immediately, just let the quiet settle. Then softly, almost to herself, she said, "Sienna, I fought so hard. I resisted falling in love with you." Her confession, raw and quiet, shattered my last defenses. Tears welled instantly, hot and insistent. I could only bow my head, the words tumbling out in a choked whisper. "Me too, Clara. I fought so hard not to admit that I was already in love with you." In that suspended moment, she reached across the small space between us. Her hand, warm and sure, found mine, our fingers intertwined. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but the effect was seismic. The low hum of the building's évacué, the distant clatter from another department, all sounds ceased. The world narrowed to the point where our skin met. A profound, resonant sense of completion washed over me, a feeling of coming home to a place I'd never known but always missed. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying. Because sometimes completion demands the shattering of what came. Before arriving home that evening, the atmosphere was thick with finality. Marcus was waiting, not in his usual armchair, but standing in the center of the living room. His face was pale, etched with a grim resolve. In his hand was a plain manila envelope. He held it out to me without words, that my fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, crisp and official, divorce papers. The words leaped off the page. He had already signed his name. I signed them, he stated, his voice unnervingly calm, devoid of accusation, filled only with an immense exhaustion. You can sign them too, if that's what you want. Tears blurred the typed words. Not tears of grief for the marriage, but of profound relief mixed with a crushing guilt. When, I managed to ask, my voice thick, when did you know? He met my gaze then, his eyes holding a lifetime of unspoken understanding. You've been physically present for years, Sienna, he said quietly, but you haven't truly been here. Not really. Not for a long time. He paused, a flicker of something, like compassion in his eyes, and I think you need someone who can really see you now. The person you actually are. His words struck with the force of truth. There was no defense, no justification left. The carefully constructed performance was over. I stood silent, the signed papers heavy in my hand, and felt the immense weight of the life I'd been living, a life that never truly belonged to me, began to slip away. It wasn't freedom yet, but the first, agonizing breath of its possibility. The dissolution of the marriage was a protracted, painful unraveling. My mother's voice, shrill with disbelief and fear. You're leaving Marcus? Have you lost your mind? Where will you ever find another man like him? Their concern was genuine, rooted in their world, but it missed the fundamental point entirely. They couldn't comprehend that I wasn't seeking a better man. I wasn't seeking a man at all. Their definition of happiness was a language I didn't speak. Building a life with Clara wasn't a fairy tale epilogue. It was messy, complex, and profoundly real. We navigated periods of intense silence born of our shared history of repression. We clashed fiercely, our arguments volcanic, precisely because we were so alike, both fiercely independent, both scarred by years of hiding, both learning the terrifying vulnerability of authenticity. The adjustment was seismic. Yet, amidst the storms, her touch remained my anchor. The simple act of her hand finding mine, her steady presence beside me in the quiet dark, could calm the most turbulent seas within me. It was a connection forged not in ease, but in the hard-won ground of mutual truth. Asterisk, asterisk, thank you for bearing witness to this deeply personal journey, our premier narrative on unsilenced lives. This channel exists to amplify the voices of women, navigating the labyrinth of societal constraints, women whose authentic desires and identities have been pressured into silence. We share their lived experiences, raw and unfiltered, told directly from the heart. Subscribe to join us as we listen, learn, and illuminate more stories of courage and self-discovery. Until next time.